The rain hammered the mountain blacktop like rifle fire. At 2:17 a.m. Ellie Harper stood soaked outside Harlan's auto repair, one hand clutching her late husband's dog tag, the other a fist of crumpled 20s and ones that added up to exactly $217. The shop door cracked open. A grizzled man in stained coveralls filled the frame. "Lady, we're closed. Take your broken-down car and your sob story somewhere else." He started to shut the door. What he didn't know was that the woman dripping on his welcome mat had come looking for the one man on earth who owed her husband an unbreakable debt. And what was hiding inside that rusted toolbox no one had touched in 8 years. Ellie Harper was 29, a nurse who once believed steady hands and night shifts could hold a life together. 3 months earlier, her husband, Staff Sergeant Ryan Harper, had been crushed under a faulty lift at the county motor pool. The compensation check never came. The bank seized the little house on Aspen Lane. By the time the last box was carried out, Ellie had one thing left: the steel dog tag Ryan pressed into her palm the week before the accident. "If anything ever happens," he'd said, voice low, "you find Harlan. He'll square it." She drove the rusted Civic until the engine seized on a switchback outside Willow Creek, Colorado. Population 1,412, one traffic light, one mechanic, and now apparently one closed sign. Jack Harlan stared at her through the gap in the door, eyes narrowed against the downpour. Rainwater ran off the brim of his faded ball cap and splattered onto concrete that smelled of diesel and wet pine. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then Sophie's small voice drifted from the back seat. 6 years old, half asleep, asking if they were home yet. Jack's jaw worked. He looked past Ellie to the little girl curled under a blanket, then down at the dog tag swinging from Ellie's fingers. The stamped letters caught the security light. Harper R. 287 missions. Something crossed his face too fast to name. "Engine's toast," he muttered. "Won't turn over again tonight. Apartment above the garage is empty. You can sleep there. One night. That's it." Ellie's shoulders sagged with relief so sharp it hurt. She whispered thank you. Jack only grunted, stepped aside, and let the rain in. By 4 in the morning, the apartment smelled of burnt coffee and motor oil. Sophie slept on a cot Jack dragged from storage, thumb tucked between her lips the way she did when the world got too loud. Ellie couldn't sleep. Instead, she drifted down the wooden stairs into the shop, looking for a blanket, or maybe just something to do with her hands. The back office door was ajar. Inside, a single bulb swung above a desk buried in paper. Ledgers, invoices, purchase orders stacked like losing poker hands. Jack had clearly given up trying to make sense of them months ago. Ellie hesitated, then stepped inside. The linoleum stuck to her sneakers. She picked up the top sheet, scanned it, then another. Her nurse's brain, the same brain that once caught a $43,000 Medicaid billing error in under 10 minutes, went to work. She saw it in 6 lines. Supplier number 1742 had been double billing for brake pads at markup. $9,400 skimmed in the last 14 months alone. The numbers were sloppy but consistent, the kind of mistake only someone who never double-checked made. Ellie didn't wake Jack. She didn't ask permission. She simply sat, pulled a legal pad from the drawer, and started fresh columns. 2 hours later, the chaos had become clean rows, red ink circling every overcharge, a new total at the bottom that showed exactly where the bleeding was. She set the revised ledger in the center of the desk, placed a single paperclip on top like a period, and walked back upstairs without a sound. At dawn, Jack came down, hair still wet from the sink, and found the book open. He flipped pages slowly. His thumb stopped on the red circles. The shop was quiet enough to hear the wall clock tick. He looked toward the stairs where the woman and child he tried to send away were still sleeping, then reached into the top drawer of the filing cabinet. His hand closed around an old rusted toolbox no one had opened in 8 years. He set it on the desk beside the ledger but didn't lift the lid. Not yet. Later that morning, he climbed the stairs with 2 mugs of coffee. Ellie was braiding Sophie's hair by the window. The dog tag lay on the table between them, catching the thin mountain light. Jack cleared his throat. "Books look different," he said. Ellie met his eyes. "They were bleeding money. I stopped the bleed. That's all." He studied her for a long moment, then glanced at the dog tag again. His shoulders dropped half an inch. "Supplier contract's up for renewal next week," he said. "If you're any good with phone calls, maybe we renegotiate. Save what we can. In return, you get the apartment. No rent, until you're back on your feet." Ellie didn't smile. She only nodded once. That was the first small reversal. The first quiet proof that the soaked woman on his doorstep was far more than a sob story. Jack didn't know it yet, but the debt Ryan Harper left behind had just started coming due. And the man who would try to crush them both was already driving toward Willow Creek in a spotless navy Brioni suit. $38,000 Rolex glinting on his wrist, Italian shoes untouched by the mud. His name was Victor Lang. He was about to make the biggest mistake of his polished life. The phone on the desk rang at 9:17 a.m. sharp. Ellie picked it up before the second ring. On the other end, a gravel-voiced supplier from Denver cleared his throat. "Harper Auto Supply? This is Dale. Contract's expiring. Same terms or we walk." Ellie glanced at the dog tag still resting beside Sophie's half-finished braid. She kept her voice even. "Dale, this is Ellie, new operations lead. I've reviewed the last 36 months. You're charging us 17 cents over market on every brake rotor and 42 on pads. That's $41,000 a year we don't have. Renew at cost plus 8 or we source from Albuquerque. Your choice." Silence stretched for 4 full seconds. Jack stood frozen in the doorway, coffee mug halfway to his lips. Dale finally laughed, low and surprised. "Lady, who the hell are you?" "Someone who can read a spreadsheet," she said. "Sign or don't." Clock's ticking. By 10:42 a.m., the new contract sat in the inbox. Cost plus 8. Signed in Dale's shaky blue ink. Jack stared at the screen like it might vanish. He looked at Ellie, then at the rusted toolbox still unopened on the corner of the desk. He said nothing, but the shop's overhead lights seemed a fraction less harsh. That afternoon, Victor Lang's black Range Rover rolled to a stop outside the shop. The engine cut with a soft click. He stepped out in that navy Brioni, creases sharp enough to draw blood, the $38,000 Rolex catching the sun like a warning. 2 junior accountants in matching gray suits followed him like obedient shadows. Victor didn't knock. He simply pushed the glass door open and let the little bell above it scream. Jack met him in the aisle between racks of corroded exhaust pipes. "Victor, didn't expect you till the audit. Plans change when money disappears, Jack." Victor's voice carried the smooth confidence of boardrooms and first-class lounges. He glanced around the dusty shelves, lip curling at a stack of bald tires. "This place is a museum. Ryan left it hemorrhaging. I'm here to cauterize." Ellie watched from the office doorway, arms folded, dog tag now tucked into the front pocket of her faded jeans. She felt its familiar edge press against her hip like a reminder. Victor's gaze slid past Jack and landed on her. "You must be the stray he took in." "Goo. But this isn't a shelter." He snapped his fingers at one of the accountants. "Show her the exit paperwork. We're terminating all non-essential personnel by close of business." The younger man produced a crisp folder. Ellie didn't take it. Instead, she stepped forward until the scent of Victor's expensive cologne clashed with the sharp smell of motor oil and old rubber. "Mr. Lang," she said quietly, "you might want to look at the revised ledgers before you start handing out pink slips." Victor smiled the way men smile when they're certain the world still belongs to them. "Ledgers? Sweetheart, I own 43% of this operation. I don't need to look at anything. The bank agrees. Foreclosure notice goes out Friday unless we liquidate half the inventory at scrap value." He leaned in, voice dropping to a velvet threat. "And scrap has no value here. Take your little notepad and go." The words landed exactly like the ones he'd once spoken to Ryan Harper in a different office 3 states away. Ellie's jaw tightened, but she only nodded once. Jack's face had gone pale. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her stuffed rabbit, sensing the shift in the air the way children always do. The shop fell so quiet the wall clock's tick sounded like hammer blows. Victor turned on his Italian heel. "I'll be back at 4 with the liquidators. Have the doors unlocked. And Jack, don't make this uglier than it has to be." The bell clanged again as they left. The Rover's tires crunched over the gravel, then faded down the mountain road. Jack sank onto a stool, elbows on his knees. "We're finished. 43%. The bank. It's over." Ellie walked to the desk and finally lifted the lid of the rusted toolbox. Inside lay a thick folder wrapped in oilcloth, edges yellowed but intact. She set it beside the dog tag. The metal tag caught the light again, the stamped name barely visible. "Harper." "Not quite," she said. Jack looked up. "What is that?" "Insurance," Ellie answered. "Ryan left it with me the night before the crash. Said if Victor ever came sniffing, open it. I've been waiting 8 years to see what it says." She didn't open it yet. Instead, she picked up the dog tag, turned it over in her fingers, and slipped it back into her pocket. The metal was warm now, almost alive. At 3:55 p.m., the liquidators arrived, 2 men in company polos carrying clipboards and pricing guns. Victor trailed behind them like a king inspecting conquered territory. He checked his Rolex, then gestured at the shelves. "Start with the diagnostic equipment. Everything with a serial number gets tagged at 10 cents on the dollar." One of the liquidators reached for the old snap-on scanner Jack had used since the 90s. Ellie's voice cut across the floor like a blade. "Touch that machine and I'll have the sheriff here before you finish the barcode." Victor laughed once. Sharp. "Sheriff? This is a civil matter, darling. You're embarrassing yourself." Ellie pulled a single sheet from the oilcloth folder. She held it up so the afternoon light pierced the paper, revealing a faded but unmistakable notary stamp and 3 signatures at the bottom. "This is a 2016 equity agreement," she said, "signed by Ryan Harper, Victor Lang, and a silent partner who funded the original loan. That partner never cashed out, never transferred title. The 43% Victor claims? It was collateral, not ownership. And the partner's name is still on the corporate charter." Victor's smile froze. "Impossible. I had Ryan's shares transferred after the funeral." Ellie met his eyes. "You had them transferred from a dead man who never signed the documents, because the real owner was never listed under that name." She let the paper drop onto the counter between them. The dog tag in her pocket felt heavier now, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. Victor stepped closer, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Whoever you are, you're making an enemy you can't afford." Ellie's reply was softer still. "Funny. Ryan said the exact same thing about you the week before he died." Outside, the mountain wind picked up, rattling the old metal sign above the door. Jack watched the exchange with dawning realization tightening his shoulders. Sophie had crept halfway down the stairs, rabbit dangling from one hand, eyes wide on the man in the spotless suit who suddenly didn't look quite so invincible. Victor's accountants shifted uneasily. One of them whispered something about needing to call the bank. The liquidators lowered their pricing guns. And for the first time since he'd stepped out of the Rover, Victor Lang's polished confidence developed the faintest crack. Barely visible, but there, like a hairline fracture in $1,000 Italian leather. Ellie slid the folder closer to him. "Page 7 has the routing numbers for the offshore accounts you thought no one knew about. Page 12 lists every inflated invoice you approved last fiscal year. Keep pushing, Mr. Lang, and the next set of documents goes to the State Attorney General before your Rolex ticks past 5. The shop smelled of dust, oil, and the faint trace of Victor's cologne beginning to sour with sudden sweat. Jack finally stood. His voice came out rough but steady. "You heard her, Victor. Take your people and get off my property. We'll discuss the rest of the debt tomorrow, in front of the board, where everyone can watch." Victor stared at Ellie for 3 long heartbeats. His eyes flicked to the dog tag now lying openly on the counter again. Its chain coiled like a sleeping snake. Recognition flickered across his face. Slow, unwelcome, dangerous. He straightened his Brioni jacket with a sharp tug. This isn't over. But as he turned toward the door, his Italian shoes left behind the first faint scuff marks on the concrete floor. Small, almost invisible. The bell clanged behind him. The Rover's engine roared to life a moment later, louder than before, as if trying to outrun something it couldn't yet name. Ellie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She picked up the dog tag once more, thumb tracing the stamped letters. Harper, the same name Ryan had carried into combat on 287 missions. The same name he'd carried out of the burning wreck on that rain-slick highway 8 years ago. Jack stepped beside her. "You gonna tell me who you really are?" She looked at Sophie, now sitting on the bottom step with her rabbit pressed to her chest. The little girl offered a tiny, uncertain smile. Ellie closed the rusted toolbox lid with a soft metallic click. "Not yet," she said. "But Victor's about to find out exactly how much that name is still worth." Victor Lang didn't sleep that night. At 2:14 a.m., his Patek read the ceiling of the penthouse like an accusation while the unread text from his CFO glowed on the nightstand. Invoice number 4471, the one Ellie had circled in red. He poured 2 fingers of Macallan, neat, and the glass trembled just enough to send a single drop onto the marble. The stain looked like blood. By sunrise, he was already moving. A 6:30 a.m. call to the board chairman. A discreet meeting at the country club where golf shoes left perfect half-moons in the dew. He painted Ellie as a disgruntled ex-employee with forged documents. A woman who'd clearly lost her mind after the accident that killed her husband. The words tasted clean in the morning air, sharpened by the scent of cut grass and expensive aftershave. The chairman nodded, patted Victor's shoulder, and promised a quiet internal review. Crisis managed, or so he thought. At 9:47 a.m., the first real fracture appeared. Jack's shop phone rang while he was under a '68 Camaro, knuckles black with grease. Ellie answered on the 3rd ring. The voice on the other end belonged to Margaret Klein, senior partner at Klein & Associates, the firm that had represented Victor's shell companies for 12 years. "Ms. Harper," Margaret said, no preamble. "We need to talk. Off the record. My office. 1 hour." Ellie's grip tightened on the receiver. She hadn't used that name in 8 years. The dog tag in her pocket suddenly felt heavier, its chain pressing against her thigh like a reminder she couldn't outrun. She hung up without answering, walked to the rusted toolbox, and lifted the lid. Inside, beneath layers of sockets and wrenches, lay the folded letter she'd carried since the night of the wreck. The one Ryan had written the morning he shipped out for his final tour. She slipped it into her jacket next to the dog tag, then looked at Sophie coloring at the break table. "Stay with Jack, sweetheart. I'll be back before lunch." Sophie clutched her rabbit tighter. "Promise. Promise." The drive to Klein & Associates took 19 minutes through downtown traffic that smelled of exhaust and impending rain. Ellie parked the old pickup between a Bentley and a Tesla, the contrast almost funny. When she stepped into the marble lobby, her boots left faint oil prints on the polished floor. The receptionist's smile faltered at the sight of her coveralls. Margaret Klein waited in a corner conference room on the 14th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the river. A single folder sat centered on the long oak table like a loaded gun. "You've been busy," Margaret said, voice clipped. She wore a charcoal Armani suit that cost more than Ellie's truck. Victor's rattled. "That doesn't happen often." Ellie sat without being asked. "He should be." Margaret slid the folder across. Inside were copies of the same routing numbers Ellie had shown Victor, but these had been annotated in red ink by someone with far more clearance. Someone who knew exactly which accounts funded which bribes. "These aren't from Victor," Ellie said quietly.
No.
"They're from the original audit trail. The one that was supposed to have been erased in 2017. The year Ryan Harper died." The name landed between them like a live round. Ellie's pulse thudded in her ears. She reached into her jacket, pulled out the dog tag, and laid it on the table. The stamped Harper caught the light from the window. Margaret stared at it for a long second. "I wondered when that would surface." "You knew him." "I knew of him. Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The man who flew the night extraction that saved 17 Marines outside Fallujah. Call sign Ghost Rider. Decorated 6 times before they grounded him for refusing an illegal order in Helmand. The same man who later became the silent financial architect behind every shell company Victor Lang ever touched." Margaret leaned forward. "And the same man who, according to sealed records, transferred full ownership of those companies to his wife 3 days before the accident that was never truly an accident." Ellie's mouth went dry. The room smelled suddenly of paper, lemon polish, and the ghost of jet fuel she hadn't smelled in years. "Victor thought the transfer died with Ryan," Margaret continued. "He had the crash report altered, paid the right people, but he never found the original ownership documents. Or the letter." Ellie's fingers brushed the folded paper in her pocket. She could feel Ryan's handwriting through the fabric, the same steady hand that had once steadied a black hawk in a sandstorm. Margaret stood, walked to the window. "I'm not here to help Victor. I'm here because 3 weeks ago I received an encrypted drive from an anonymous source. It contained flight logs, mission manifests, and a video. The video shows Victor signing off on the sabotage of your husband's brakes the night he drove home from the hangar. It also shows Ryan handing over the master ledger 30 minutes before the crash. The ledger that proves you, Eleanor Harper, have been the legal owner of Lang Dynamics for 8 years." The words settled over Ellie like a parachute after a long free fall. Margaret turned back. "Victor's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow at 10 a.m. He plans to have you arrested for corporate espionage the moment you walk through the doors. He's already got the chief of police on speed dial. But if you walk in with the original letter, the dog tag, and the master ledger, there won't be an arrest. There'll be a reckoning." Ellie stood slowly. The dog tag clinked softly against the letter in her pocket. "And you?" she asked. Margaret's smile was small and tired. "I'm tired of cleaning up after men who think money erases blood. Consider this my resignation letter. Delivered in advance." She slid a new business card across the table. On the back, written in precise handwriting, "Seat 18C, First Class. Tomorrow's red-eye to DC. If you need extraction." Ellie didn't take the card. Not yet. Instead, she picked up the dog tag, let the chain coil once more around her fingers. The metal was warm now, almost alive. Back at the shop, the air had changed. Jack had cleared the workbench and laid out every tool in perfect order, the way Ryan used to before a mission. Sophie sat on a stool swinging her legs, rabbit in her lap, watching the door like a sentinel. When Ellie walked in, Jack straightened. His eyes went straight to the fresh tension in her shoulders. "Trouble. Opportunity," she said. She set the dog tag on the counter again. This time it lay beside Ryan's letter, unfolded just enough to show the opening line. "Ellie, if you're reading this, I didn't make it home." Sophie slid off the stool and came to stand beside her. Small fingers reached out and traced the stamped name on the tag. "Daddy's?" she asked. Ellie's throat tightened. She crouched so they were eye level, the scent of crayons and motor oil wrapping around them like a blanket. "Yeah, baby, Daddy's." Jack watched them, arms crossed, the faintest hint of a smile breaking through the grease on his face. But his eyes were serious. "Board meetings tomorrow," he said. "Whole town's gonna be there. Press too. Lang made sure of it." He's planning to bury you in front of everyone who ever laughed at the idea of a mechanic's widow owning anything bigger than a socket set. Ellie stood, folding the letter once more and tucking it safely beside the tag. Then tomorrow, she said, voice low and steady, we remind them who actually built this town's future. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping against the shop's metal roof like distant rotor blades. Victor Lang was at that same moment standing in his corner office, staring at the city grid below, unaware that the hairline fracture in his $1,000 confidence had just become a fault line. He still believed he could crush a grieving widow and a broken-down mechanic. He had no idea the widow was the original owner. He had no idea the mechanic had flown 287 combat missions under the same name now stamped on a dog tag resting on a dusty counter. And he had no idea that tomorrow, in the boardroom on the 32nd floor of the Lang Dynamics Tower, every person who had once dismissed Eleanor Harper would watch her collect a debt 8 years in the making. The only question left was how deep the scuff marks on Victor's Italian shoes would get before he finally understood exactly what that name was still worth. Victor Lang arrived at the boardroom early, the click of his polished Italian loafers echoing against marble floors. His Brioni suit sat sharp across his shoulders, the Patek Philippe on his wrist catching the overhead lights at precisely 9:47 a.m. He adjusted his cuff links, confident. The room filled quickly. Town officials, investors, 3 local reporters, and the same mechanics and widows who had once smirked behind their coffee cups at Ellie Harper's Little Garage Dreams. They took seats around the long oak table, leather creaking, whispers humming like static. Lang stood at the head, projector remote in hand, a smug half-smile playing on his lips. "Let's begin," he said, voice smooth as oiled machinery. "Today we finalize the acquisition of Harper Dynamics, or what's left of it. A sad chapter for a once proud name, now reduced to scrap and sentiment." He clicked the first slide. Red ink spelled insolvency across projected balance sheets. A low chuckle rippled through the room. Someone in the back muttered, "Told you she was in over her head." Ellie sat 3 chairs down, wearing the same faded coveralls she'd worn the day he'd fired her husband's memory from the company ledgers. Jack stood behind her, arms folded, the dog tag now tucked inside his shirt pocket, its chain a cool line against his chest. Lang didn't look at her. "Eleanor, you had your chance to walk away with dignity. Instead, you dragged this into a public spectacle. For what? A mechanic's shop and a dead pilot's name on a rusted sign? The board has voted. We absorb the assets. You get nothing but a final invoice for 8 years of unpaid rent on the old hangar. $217,000, due immediately." He slid the document across the table. The paper whispered against polished wood. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. The room leaned in, hungry for the widow's collapse. Ellie didn't flinch. She reached into her pocket and placed a single folded letter beside the invoice. Ryan's handwriting. Then she set the dog tag on top of it, the metal clinking once, sharp and final. The same tag Sophie had traced the night before. The same one that had traveled through 3 deployments and 1 final silent return. "Before you foreclose," she said quietly, "you should know the hangar was never yours to rent." Lang laughed once, short and brittle. "Gee, emotional props won't change the numbers, Eleanor. This company is mine. The patents, the contracts, the future. All of it." She slid a second folder across. Thick, bound in faded green. "Patent 287B. Filed under my maiden name, Eleanor Voss. Before I became Eleanor Harper. Before I let Ryan's vision carry the load so he could fly." The room fell silent. Lang's smile froze. She continued, voice steady but carrying. "The original schematics for the adaptive rotor system that powers every drone you sell to the Pentagon. Mine. The firmware update that saved your last 3 contracts from failure? Written in the back of my garage at 2:14 a.m. while Sophie slept in a car seat beside the workbench. You've been licensing my work for 8 years and paying yourself 7-figure bonuses. I have the timestamps, the escrow accounts, the original signatures. Jack stepped forward, unfolding a printout. And the mechanic you laughed at? Call sign Ghost Actual.
287 Combat Mission.
The man who stress-tested every prototype in theater before it ever reached your desk. He never told you his real last name because you never asked. You just saw the grease and the limp. A reporter's camera flashed. One of the older board members, a man who had attended Ryan's funeral, slowly removed his glasses. The whispers turned. Lang's face drained of color. His Italian shoes shifted, scuffing audibly against the marble as he tried to find his footing. This is impossible. The records are incomplete, Ellie finished, because I let you believe the lie. I was grieving. I was tired. I let you steal what Ryan and I built so Sophie could grow up without watching her mother fight wolves in boardrooms. But she's 8 now, old enough to know her father's name is worth more than your suit. She stood. The dog tag caught the light as she lifted it, chain dangling. This room laughed when you fired the janitor who kept the prototypes running. Laughed when you called my garage scrap metal with no value. They're not laughing now. Every eye turned to Lang. His $1,000 confidence cracked wide open. The Patek on his wrist suddenly looked heavy, ridiculous. He stared at the dog tag, at the letter, at the woman he had dismissed in front of the whole town 8 years earlier. The silence stretched until it hurt. Finally, Victor Lang cleared his throat. His voice came out smaller than anyone expected. I need a moment. Privately. Ellie nodded once. The two of them stepped into the adjacent glass-walled office while the boardroom watched through the clear partition. Lang closed the door. His shoulders dropped. The Italian shoes stopped moving. I didn't know, he said, the words scraping out like rust. About Ryan. About any of it. I saw a widow with a failing business and I told myself it was just business. But I humiliated you. In front of your daughter's future.
I'm sorry, Eleanor.
Truly, that apology is 8 years late, and I know it doesn't erase the damage. Ellie studied him, the tremor in his hands, the way his perfect cuff links no longer looked perfect. She gave a single nod. Say it out there, where they can hear it. Then we'll talk about what happens next. They returned. Lang stood at the head of the table again, but this time the projector was off. He looked at the gathered faces. Mechanics, reporters, the same people who had once nodded along as he buried a hero's legacy. I was wrong, he said, voice carrying across the room, raw and unsteady. I publicly disrespected Eleanor Harper and the memory of Captain Ryan Harper. I called their life's work scrap. I mocked the man who kept this company alive from 7,000 miles away while I collected the credit. That was arrogance. That was theft. I apologize, unreservedly, to Ellie, to Sophie, to every person in this room I misled. The patents belong to her. The company belongs to her. I will sign whatever she requires to make that right. Today, the room exhaled. A few claps started, hesitant, then stronger. One of the mechanics wiped his eyes. Ellie remained standing, the dog tag now back in her palm, warm from her grip. 6 weeks later, the old hangar smelled of fresh paint and engine grease. Sunlight slanted through new skylights at 10:12 a.m. Sophie sat on a crate swinging her legs. A stuffed Black Hawk helicopter clutched in one arm. The same toy Ryan had mailed from Afghanistan the week before his last flight. Jack tightened the final bolt on a prototype rotor hub, the metallic clink echoing like distant rotor blades. Ellie watched them from the office doorway. Ryan's letter unfolded on the desk beside her. The line that had once broken her now anchored her. Ellie, if you're reading this, I didn't make it home, but know that everything we built was always yours to finish. She folded it carefully and slid it back into the inner pocket of her coveralls, right next to the dog tag. The metal pressed against her heart, cool and constant. Victor Lang appeared in the open bay door. No Brioni suit this time. Just khakis and a plain button-down, sleeves rolled. His Italian shoes were gone, replaced by practical work boots already scuffed at the toes. He carried a cardboard box of files. "I brought the remaining escrow records," he said quietly. "And the transfer papers. All of them." Ellie studied him. The man who had once towered was now simply present. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, eyes on the floor for a moment. "I've been volunteering down at the Veterans Center, listening more than talking. Turns out a lot of those pilots knew Ryan. They told me stories, made me realize how small I looked next to what he gave." Sophie hopped off the crate and walked over, offering him the stuffed helicopter. "You can hold it. It's Daddy's, but he says sharing is okay." Lang took the toy with careful hands. For the first time in years, the corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't calculated. "Thank you, Sophie." Jack wiped his hands on a rag and joined them. The four of them stood in the middle of the revived hangar that once carried only dust and doubt. Outside, the town moved on, but inside these walls the future smelled of oil, metal, and second chances. In the end, the debt wasn't collected in rage. It was collected in truth. In a room full of witnesses who would never again mistake a mechanic's widow for anything less than the architect of their sky. And sometimes the loudest revenge isn't a shout. It's the quiet sound of a dog tag settling back where it belongs, against the chest of the woman who never stopped earning its weight. What matters is not who dismisses you when the lights are bright. It's who remains standing when the lights go out and the real work begins. Honor is not loud. It is patient. It waits in the grease and the grief and the long nights, until the moment the world finally sees its true name. And when that moment comes, even the proudest shoes will scuff on their way to saying they're sorry.